It is my pleasure to introduce you today to a remarkable individual who has dedicated his life to public service and fighting for the rights of the marginalized and vulnerable in our society. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Shaun Fluker, the NDP candidate for Airdrie Cochrane District.
Thanks, Andrea, for that kind introduction, and thank you, everybody, for coming tonight to listen to Dan and I say a few words, but also take your questions and hopefully, answer any questions that you may have for us. Obviously, that's the most important aspect of this evening. So I'll start off by saying just a few words about myself, and then I think, Dan, I'll hand it over to you to do the same, and then I think the format here was going to be that we would take questions from the audience if folks are interested and willing to do that at the outset, just to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask the questions that they have for us this evening. And then once we've covered the room in that sense, I think the idea was to sort of break down more socially or informally into more of a meet and greet in the audience sort of thing. I know that some folks are a lot more comfortable asking questions when they don't have to stand up like I am at the moment with a microphone and ask it in front of everybody. So I appreciate the need to do that. So yeah, my name is Shaun Fluker. I am the Alberta NDP candidate for Airdrie Cochrane, and I come to politics. This is my first time running as a political candidate. I'm trained as a lawyer, and so I've been practicing law in the Calgary area for 27 years. I'm also at the University of Calgary. I am an associate professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Calgary, and that work has kept me closely aligned with public policy, primarily in the province of Alberta, since I joined the university back in 2007. So I've been at the University of Calgary for 15 years. My wife Samantha and I, we do live in Cochrane. We've been in Cochrane since 2005. We've raised 3 kids there. All 3 have gone through the Rocky View Schools public system. 1 is graduated now. 2 are in Cochrane High. And my wife Samantha is a teacher at Manitoba, which is the middle school, one of the middle schools in Cochrane. And I guess having lived in Cochrane since 2005 and having spent many weekends primarily in Airdrie, because all 3 of my kids have been involved in either some sport or another, minor hockey for my son, dance and gymnastics for my 2 daughters, and as it turns out, the facilities in Airdrie have always been accommodating to us. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm very familiar with some of the challenges facing our communities, both of which are, the 2, Airdrie and Cochrane together, are the 2 fastest growing communities in Alberta. And fast-growing communities like ours need real and strong support from the provincial government. And one of the primary reasons why I'm running as the Airdrie Cochrane candidate is because I simply believe that the current government has failed us in that regard. So that's my opening words, and maybe Dan, I'll turn it over to you to say a few words.
Sure. Well, hi folks, Dan Nellis, and I'm your Alberta NDP candidate in Airdrie East. I guess we'll start, with a little bit of the CV stuff, right, and then get into some of the more prepared remarks that you were intending there, Shaun.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you feel is best.
Right, because we haven't done the policy, and we will endeavor not to repeat ourselves, because as you know, we're from the same party. You don't need to hear the same thing twice. So That said, a little bit about my background. I'm a lifelong resident of Airdrie. My family moved here when I was just 5 years old, and I went through the elementary school system here, Edwards Elementary and Nicole Airdrie, and then George McDougall High School. I've raised my family here too. I'm raising my family here. I have 5 children of my own, and of a variety of age ranges. One of them is in post-secondary, another in high school, and a couple that have just started kindergarten, and one that is just in daycare. So it's been an adventure thus far, and but it gives me a bit of a deep understanding of the challenges facing Airdrie families today. A little bit more about my personal background. I have several degrees, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education, and a master's degree in philanthropy and nonprofit leadership. I was a high school teacher for 8 years before transitioning into a labor relations role with the Alberta Teachers Association, which I've been doing for the past 11 years now. This is an important time in the province of Alberta, and before we go much further, I think it's also important to recognize the current state of emergency in the province and the fact that we have several families in the province that are being impacted by the wildfires up north, and I think it would be remiss. I've got friends who have already been evacuated. I'd be remiss to say that we shouldn't be thinking about those folks, and would strongly urge you to consider, if you can do something, if you can offer some assistance, please consider what assistance you can offer, because the time will probably come where we will all need to chip in at some point to make sure those folks are taken care of. And that's something I know about Albertans, is that Albertans come together to take care of each other when the rubber hits the road. That being said, we have several words to say about the Alberta NDP and some of the plans that we have when we form government in the next 3 weeks. I'll pass it back to Shaun first to say a few words about some of his components, and then we'll move on to the things that are on my talking points. Okay. Yeah, sorry. This is the effort at coordinating our remarks here. But
we were on the doors today, so we didn't have a chance.
I know. Yeah. That's kind of the life of the candidate, right? Is to get to as many folks as we can get to. But yeah, so up to this point, I've been to about 5,000 houses in Airdrie, and you know, this is where we work. This is where our kids go to daycare. This is where we go to school. This is where we go to the doctor, if we can find one. But one of the reasons I'm running is because I believe you deserve better. You deserve a leader that you can trust, and not someone who's going to flip-flop between positions from morning to night. You deserve better health care, and better health care that's closer to home, and a family doctor that you don't have to pay for. And these are things that I've heard at the doors of Airdrie. Folks are very concerned about this. The innumerable people in Airdrie have indicated to me that they can't find a family physician. This is very problematic. Our 24-hour urgent care center in Airdrie is precariously understaffed and under-resourced, up to the point where over the summer it couldn't meet its mandate being 24 hours urgent care. It has been since at risk of not meeting that 24-hour mandate since then. So that's completely unacceptable. We need to do better for folks in Airdrie. We need to do better as a province in making sure that our health system is there for us when we need it. The UCP's war with doctors has led to this crisis, and instead of fighting with doctors and nurses, your Alberta NDP wants to recruit them. Our Family Health Team's plan involves the largest healthcare professional recruitment campaign that this province has ever seen. You deserve better jobs as well, with better wages in an economy that's strong and resilient and growing. And that's why we also have a plan to attract $20 billion in private sector capital investment to create more than 47,000 new jobs in the province. Your kids deserve better education. And as a former teacher and a member of the library board here in Airdrie, I believe in quality education. Now, the UCP cuts have left schools more than 2,000 teachers short of where we should be. And you'll recall several years ago, they also fired several thousand education assistants. This has left our teachers and our students underserved. We're not building in Alberta the schools that we need in our growing communities. Airdrie has enough new student enrollments to fill a brand new school every single year. We have had 0 new schools in the past 4 years. Also unacceptable. So this is all why we plan on hiring more than 4,000 new teachers and 3,000 new education assistants and support staff so that your kids can get the attention that they need. The last time Rachel Notley was Premier, she built or modernized 240 new schools across the province of Alberta, and we have a track record of supporting public education and investing in education infrastructure. We will make sure that schools get built in the communities that need them most, and I would argue Airdrie is one of those communities. You deserve an MLA and a Premier who listens to you and your community. Danielle Smith and the UCP are simply too risky for Albertans to trust. They have the wrong priorities, but we don't. Your priorities are our priorities. Thank you. I'll pass it back to my colleague.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I guess I do want to make sure that there's a lot of time for folks to ask us questions. And I'll just add a few words to Dan's remarks. And so just in relation to healthcare, for example, I think one of the primary, one of the most important things going forward is to restore a positive and trusted relationship between healthcare workers and their provincial government. And things like making sure that we keep Airdrie ambulances in Airdrie, and just offer a much more supportive working environment. I mean, the crisis in the public healthcare system is in many ways a crisis about that working relationship, and so a lot of work needs to be done there. And the second primary aspect of improving the public healthcare system that the Alberta NDP is campaigning on, which you've probably heard of, is our proposal to implement the Family Teams Plan, which is an ambitious plan, but one which aims to ensure that people that live in Airdrie have timely and proper access to primary health care when they need it, irrespective of ability to pay. And it's a model that is working in Ontario. It's a model that has been implemented in a clinic in Northwest Calgary. And it's a model that's being endorsed by professionals in the healthcare system. And I truly believe that is an important step forward. It's a way of ensuring that we address the long wait times in our urgent care center, the long wait times in our emergency departments, in our hospitals. We need to do a much better job at making sure that we all have the access that we need to primary health care. And that's why you're hearing the Alberta NDP speak about that at every single opportunity. The crisis in the public healthcare system, as we all know, is real, and we need to address it. So.
Can we give a round of applause to these guys? Wow. Thank you.
I don't know who's comfortable, but the way that this usually works for me is that if anybody would like to ask us a question, somebody goes around the room. Andrea's, I think, offering to do that with the mic. And if you can hear my voice in the back of the room, I don't necessarily need the mic if others want to use it to ask questions or what have you.
Oh, I have teacher voice, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
Questions?
It's okay, I also have a teacher voice.
Oh,
I'm glad that you've got kids that are in the gamut of the education system, Dan. What I would like to know is when and if the NDP get elected, and I'm praying that they do, will you repeal this god-awful, backwards-looking curriculum that used to be enforced?
Yeah, that is a commitment that Rachel Notley made several months ago, is that within the first 90 days of her mandate as Premier, that curriculum would be repealed. We need a process in place that is that involves education professionals in the development of the curriculum. So we had, before the UCP came in, we had a curriculum that was a draft curriculum, pardon me, that was thoughtful and well researched, but ultimately was not finished. And what needs to happen in my mind is that needs to come back and be run through an appropriate curriculum development process involving the appropriate stakeholders, teachers, parents, community members, and get that curriculum into the classroom that evokes creative thought, evokes critical thinking, and not something that is based on rote memory.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they've set us back years, frankly. I mean, we were working decades, sure. We were working on, curriculum reform, and yeah, major setback. We need to get back on track, absolutely.
I'm very concerned about how far down the road we've gone with charter schools, and with her announcement now of a major charter school in Edmonton, a major charter school in Calgary. She promised a charter school being built in Airdrie, and we can't even get portables. So once the ink is on the paper, how far back can you walk those things?
Well, if I may,
No, go ahead.
curriculum is one thing. The Education Act provides for a place for charter schools within the province, right? Charter schools are designed to exist where a specialized program is not willing to be offered by a particular public or separate school division. So I still see there being a place in the province for those systems and for those locations. But that shouldn't come at the expense of students within the public and separate system. You cannot favor charter schools and ignore the thousands of students that are enrolled in our public system and fail to recognize the enrollment pressures that our public schools are facing. As you probably know, Rocky View Schools requested more than 30 modular units in order to satisfy the enrollment crisis that they're undergoing. And the province, in their most recent budget, decided to fund 9. Well, that's just unacceptable. We need to make sure that we have space for these students so they're not learning out of inappropriate learning spaces like cafeterias, which I know that is happening in Rocky View. And, as I say, if there's a place for charter schools, that's fine, but not at the expense of the public system.
I agree with you, that there is a space for certain charter schools, but when you start pouring 80 million into a charter school, that's not acceptable.
It's inappropriate.
Well, and let's crystallize that moment now. I mean, the UCP issued their 2023 budget, billions and billions of dollars, surplus dollars, and Airdrie and Cochrane both received 0 new construction money for public K-12 schools. I mean,
One. There is a Francophone high school.
oh, sorry, that's right, yeah. So the Rocky View School Division is what I meant to say. I met with the Rocky View School Division about a week and a half ago, and we had a really frank discussion about where they're at. And I mean, successive capital plans issued by Rocky View Schools over the last few years has been crystal clear, calling for, well, 3 of the top 5 schools are Airdrie schools, right? I think everybody here probably knows that. 2 K-8 schools and a high school. And they're flabbergasted at the fact that that doesn't even get a response, frankly. In terms of modulars, they asked for modulars last year, they got none. They asked for 32 modulars this year, and I believe they got 10. And the really unfortunate aspect of public K-12 education in Airdrie, and this goes back to what I was mentioning at the outset, which is to say, fastest growing communities in Alberta need that kind of support. It's essential. And we're already at the point where Rocky View Schools is saying our schools are going to be at capacity by 2025, 2026, and it doesn't matter what you do now. We're already at the point where we're already almost at capacity, as Dan alluded to, where things are already being done within the schools to try to accommodate the situation. But we're now at the point where, even if new construction money is announced on June the 1st, Rocky View Schools is already going to have difficulty. And as far as I'm concerned, that lays at the feet of the UCP. I mean, they've been getting this message for years. And so it's one thing to be in favor of choice in education. As far as I'm concerned, it's quite something else to be for choice in education, but starve the public system. No way. That's a non-starter for me. So, yeah, I have kids that are going, through the K-12 system, and it really made me angry, frankly, to get the messages that I got from the principals in those schools, apologizing to me as a parent, saying, I'm sorry, your child may be standing in the room in September because we're going to need a month to figure out where to put everybody. That's totally unacceptable. So I know we're speaking the same message, but it's crucial. The time is now to make those investments, and the fact that they're not being made in cities like Airdrie is, really, as far as I'm concerned, really completely unacceptable. If I can emphasize the word, yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Thanks for taking the time tonight. Really appreciate it. I have a couple questions that are also kind of in that health education realm, because I'm a parent of a young man who I had to pay for a private assessment for because we couldn't access it through the school system. But I was curious about how your party was looking at addressing the loss of SLP, OT, and PT services that occurred right during the COVID-19 period in the K-12 system, as well as how they might look at addressing the decimation of program unit funding for early education because of the significant long-term impact that has on literacy and high school completion.
Yeah, thank you. In my day-to-day work, my role involves answering questions for teachers on a variety of topics and subjects, and one of the most heartbreaking calls that I get on almost a weekly basis is from teachers in special education programming. Classroom complexity is a deep issue for teachers and students right now. When I say classroom complexity, what I mean is the integration of students with either high or specialized needs into the regular classroom without the appropriate supports to provide for their needs. The Alberta NDP has been quite clear that we need to bring back supports for teachers in order to address this crisis. And so that's why you've seen just this past week an announcement to hire more than 3,000 either education assistants or other support workers, of which would be included in that psychologists, SLPs, behavioral support workers, that sort of thing. These folks are absolutely essential to helping teachers understand the specific nature of the needs of our students, and then helping them to plan for meeting those needs in the classroom. On top of that, of course, you have to hire additional teachers. You can't have these students integrated into the regular program with a class size of 40 students and still expect to get the same educational outcomes as you would in a classroom of perhaps 20, 22. So hiring additional teachers is another vital component to the plan to better meet the needs of students with specialized learning needs. To the point about program unit funding, or PUF, as it's popularly known. This is, for the uninitiated, PUF is specialized envelope funding that's available kind of at the start of a student's educational journey that you can access either in preschool or kindergarten, sometimes even as late as grade 1, in order to provide kind of that kickstart to learning that, and help bring them up to the level that they need to be in order to achieve the outcomes that are expected at that particular grade. That program funding was largely removed by the UCP to the detriment of the education system and to the detriment of our students. When you remove that funding and remove that extra assistance, you more or less expect these students to just, try and keep up, or expect the teachers to try and help them keep up in their classrooms of, 30 or 40 students. It's not happening. And so I'm going to advocate for that funding to be returned. It is a vital component of helping these early learners get to the level they need to be at in order to achieve and feel confident in their learning. Because as an educator, you have to understand that if a student begins that journey and is discouraged and doesn't feel able to succeed, that has an impact on every year after that. So, and I thank you for the question, because it's such an important issue, but that funding needs to return.
Yeah, and I'll just add, so my spouse, Samantha, she actually works with kids who need those sort of learning supports at Manitowoc. And so I hear these stories on a regular basis. And one of the things that Samantha tells me all the time is that the loss of funding in those programs has also meant the loss of really one-on-one working relationships with the professionals and with the students. And so what might still be available is largely consultative access, which is to say that, again, the obligation or the work falls onto the teacher, who then has to reach out to the professional and go back. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I've received several messages from folks in my riding who are asking me, like, why does the funding stop at kindergarten? Like, what's the rationale for that decision? And there isn't one, right? Right? There isn't a rational explanation for that. So, yeah, the Alberta NDP is committed to restoring that funding. It's part of our overall plan to improve the working relationship, the working environment in our schools, right? Teachers and other folks who work in the schools. And so, yeah, very important question. Thanks for asking that question, for sure. Yeah.
So I'm a student and I'm currently in university. I was hoping you could elaborate on measures that the NDP would institute to increase affordability, because we're experiencing a real cost of living crisis right now. Things are getting more expensive every week, and it's getting more difficult to afford the education that I need.
So I'm at the University of Calgary, so I know all about those challenges. And you would have heard Rachel announce a freeze on tuition going forward as one measure to try to address that. We also have to look at other ways in which universities have really been forced to impose more costs on students. Outside of tuition, there's all sorts of other ancillary fees that get charged to students. It's also important to keep in mind that one of the reasons why tuition has been rising, and these other fees in particular have been rising as quickly as they are, is because base operating grants to Alberta post-secondary institutions have been cut by about 25% over the last 4 years. I mean, that's my workplace, so I know all about that. It's universities and colleges and other secondary institutions are scrambling, to stay afloat in this environment. And so they really have not had much choice but to raise, tuition to the maximum extent possible. So one of the things that people need to remember going forward about, the UCP's proposal to cap tuition increases at 2% is that they haven't announced restoring any base operating funding. And so actually, they're making life worse in post-secondary institutions because universities and colleges have been relying on that source of revenue to try to offset the cuts that they've faced. So an Alberta NDP government will indirectly make life better for students by also doing a much better job of supporting those institutions and making it such that they don't have to rely solely on students to try to balance their books. So it's more of a holistic approach, I think, in that sense. But absolutely, tuition has risen. What are the numbers? 25, 30% over the last 4 years. I mean, in 2019, I think Alberta post-secondary institutions were sort of middle of the pack across the country in terms of actual costs. We're right back up to right near the top. And the UCP has been implementing this approach. Some folks in the room may remember early in their mandate, they commissioned this McKinnon report, and it was largely talking about offloading the expense of post-secondary education onto students. We're gonna reverse that trend.
And certainly, tuition is one piece of that puzzle, but I think the inflation crisis has hit not just students, but everyone in this room with increased costs and difficulties when we talk about the cost of living. So for somebody like yourself, reintroducing caps on automobile insurance rates and bringing those costs back down is another important measure to help make life more affordable for folks. We also want to reintroduce caps on electricity and gas rates and make sure that we at least have some controls over the things that we can actually legislate, so that you have more money to spend on things that we can't legislate controls over, like the price of groceries. But the plan that was instituted by the UCP to defer electricity costs, that's going to come home to roost in about 2 months' time. Folks are going to get a very nasty bill because it was more or less a payday loan scheme, right? Rather than pay the electricity costs up front, all that was done was defer those costs to July 1st of 2023. So that's not a solution. That is just kicking the can down the road. And that's not something the Alberta NDP is favorable towards. We want to make sure that we actually put caps on these rates so that folks can, well, first of all, afford it now, but second of all, so that you don't have to pay for it later.
If there's one more question, we can take one more question. Otherwise, we can just mingle and munch on cookies. One more, all right.
Thank you. I know I've spoken to Dan about this, but everybody in this room knows somebody who's disabled. Everybody in this room knows somebody who's disabled, even if they don't know it. And the struggles that disabled people have in this province are without precedent. I would like to know if you are committed to increasing the benefit rate to a living income so that people can live with dignity and self-respect. And that means, to me, $3,500 a month to start. Because if you're looking at a $1,400 a month average price for a one-bedroom apartment in this province, giving them $1,768, which is what the highest amount is now, doesn't cut it. Because the additional expenses such as electricity bills, gas, food, and everything else that goes along with living increases their expenses to closer to $4,000 a month. So would you be willing to entertain a $3,500 a month basic level income for disabled people in Alberta so that they can live like normal human beings, or as normal as they can?
Thanks for the question. I'm not in a position to guarantee an exact dollar amount tonight, but I am in a position to tell you that the Alberta NDP is firmly committed to raising those supports and bringing back dignity in the lives of folks who need that, right? I mean, absolutely, the choice on May 29th is, couldn't be starker in that sense, between a government that is abandoning folks who need that support and a government that is committed not just to returning us to where we were, but getting us back on the path of getting folks to that point where they can live in dignity on a living wage or a living income. And you also have my commitment to you that I will listen to those concerns, hear your concerns, talk to you about that, and take it to the government that I am a part of. It's one of the things that I didn't say at the outset, but again, as having practiced as a lawyer for almost 30 years, I've spent more than half my adult life listening to the concerns of others and advocating on their behalf, and I would be pleased to do that as your elected MLA.
Well, Shaun, I don't think I could have put it any better than that. This concept of providing supports for the severely handicapped is something that the Alberta NDP strongly believes in, and absolutely agree. As your elected representatives in the legislature, we will commit to fighting for those rights and to make sure that you have the capacity to live with dignity.
Oh, no, go ahead. You're the moderator. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you everyone so much. So we have until 8 o'clock tonight, so please feel free, grab some coffee. I'll make some more and I'll refill the snack table, no worries. And take your opportunity to chat with Dan and Shaun about more of your concerns if you want to talk to them one-on-one. We do have time, and thank you all again for coming tonight.